Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 805. Before I get started, I wanted to say that this game was kind of a model game for how to play the Neo-Archangelsk defense. It wasn't, my opponent selected kind of a rare line, but it's an important a tactical point to this opening that you have to understand in order to be able to play it successfully. So let's see, it remained a model game up until we got into the rook and pawn endgame, and then it turned into a bunch of mistakes. But it was pretty good for a while, so let's take a look at it. E4, E5. Also, the mistakes in the rook and pawn endgame were kind of instructive as well, so I will talk about them. But to start with, we just have a normal Ruy Lopez, bishop B5. And I play A6, the main move here, although at the top levels, I guess they're mostly playing the Berlin defense with knight F6. And even Alpha Alpha 0 is playing playing the Berlin defense. Anyway, I still like playing A6. And white can take the pawn, go for the exchange variation, but the main move is to drop back. Now knight F6 hitting the center, and white castles. And at this point, there's a few variations that black can choose from. Bishop E7 leads to the classical closed Ruy Lopez. Knight to E4 is the open Ruy Lopez. And then B5 leads to a couple different lines. So after bishop B3, you have the idea of bishop E7 once again, transposing back into the closed Ruy Lopez. You can play bishop to B7, that's the Archangelsk variation, or you can play bishop to C5, like I did in the game, that's the Neo-Archangelsk. So white goes with C3, that's one of the main moves. The other main idea here is to play A4 and try and weaken these advanced pawns on the king side, which is actually A4 is a good move to keep in mind because it's playable at several points in the opening, not just here, but later as well. But C3 is a good way to start building up a big center. Black needs to defend the center. This is coming under fire very quickly after white plays E4. And then black has the idea of just trying to hold on to the center. So the knight and the pawn are both holding on to E4. And so black is just trying to hold things. And normally that's what happens. White could continue with moves like bishop to E3, just putting up a counter to this bishop on that diagonal. There's also A4 at this point, going after these pawns, or even quiet moves like H3 to stop this bishop from coming out and pinning the knight. One of the ideas is that black hasn't committed this bishop, so it could go in either direction at this point. But what white does is white spots a tactic. And, well, it's a very tempting tactic, I guess, because I've run into this several times. It just turns out it does not work in white's favor. But on the surface, at least, it looks like white can win a pawn. And he does win a pawn to begin with. It's just that in that position, black always manages to get the pawn back. So and emerges with a good position. So let's take a look at it. This is how the game went. And the idea is to trade queens. So if you take back with the pawn, white can trade queens right away. And if you take with the knight to avoid losing f7, then white can grab the pawn on e5. So the way to play this is to take with the knight. Knight takes. Pawn takes. You just let white play this tactic. Queen takes, and the bishop takes f7. So white has won a pawn, but you have the move rook f8. Very important move for a couple of different reasons. But first off, it hits the bishop and this pawn is hanging. That pawn on e4 is just loose. So this is kind of a tricky position. Let's see. He played bishop d5, which is the main move, and we'll see what happens. But there are some tactical ideas involved. If you try something like bishop b3, you can actually just take that pawn. And if he tries this typical idea of rook e1, skewering the knight and winning the pawn back, yeah, bishop takes f2, and you win material. So he can't play that. And if he plays this move here, bishop d5, also a very tempting tactic, forking two loose pieces, the rook in the corner and the knight. You play knight takes f2. And this is still winning for black. There's a winning attack here. The main point is that he hasn't got time to take the rook. There's actually a mate in 2 here. If you want to spot the mate in 2, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I'm giving the answer away now. So you just bring the knight here. It's a double check, so the king has to move, and then rook there is mate. So that's not working. Let's see. Yeah, in the game he played bishop d5, and that's really the best move. Just retreat here, defend the pawn, but now black gets the bishop pair by taking off the knight, and black gets the pawn back anyway, because this pawn cannot be defended. The c-pawn can't come forward. It's blocked by this advanced b-pawn. The c-pawn itself is blocking the knight, so the knight can't defend it. And let's see, I guess he could bring the rook over and defend it for a while, but in the long run, white black always gets that pawn back. So so you have the bishop pair, and you have an even material, and you have slightly better development. So this is a position that favors black, actually. So that tactic really backfired on white. Let's see, he continued with bishop to e3. So you do have to play quickly here. You can't let him get his pieces out and get developed, or get this pawn defended. So you really need to take. You don't want him to take and, you know, give you this clump of pawns over here on the A and the B files. And now your rook is hanging, so you have to keep taking. But at this point, you finally get the pawn back, and you have an endgame where there's a slight edge to black. This is probably not winning for black, but well, black still has chances, and black has better odds than white does in this game. Let's see, knight d2. I mean, to start with, there's better development for black, and then it's a bishop versus a knight with pawns on both sides of the board. So those are kind of small advantages, though, because at this point, white can get his pieces out very quickly. So let's see, he played knight d2, I went king e7. And now the book move, you see we're still in book after 19 moves. He can play e4 here and kick the bishop back. It might go like this, e4, bishop, e6. And that's why this position, although it's slightly better for black, is probably holdable for white. Anyway, he didn't play that way. He went with rook to d1 in this position, where the book move was e4. So rook d1, and we're out of book. I continued with rook f8 check, and actually there's a pretty decent advantage to black here. I don't know if I ever had a winning edge, but I had some good chances in this game. Oh, right here is probably one of my best chances. I was thinking about taking this pawn, and so I played a5 to prepare. Say if he tries to trap my bishop with b3, I would be able to play a4 and get the bishop out. But it turns out I didn't need that move. There was another way to save the bishop from being trapped. So I can take it, and if he plays b3, which is just a mistake at this point, I can play the move rook d8, a pretty nice move. Now he can't bring the rook over here to attack my bishop and win it, because I just take the knight and defend the bishop at the same time. Pretty interesting circumstance. And there's a big threat here. I'm threatening just to take there, and that would win the exchange at least. So b3 is actually a bad move, and he just has to let me keep that extra pawn, and he can play on. So that was one of my chances to get an edge, a winning edge potentially. Let's see. I went with a5. I didn't spot that idea. He went to b3. Now I can't take on a2 anymore. Let's see. I activate my rook. Try and get it into the game. He goes c4, and I just trade. Takes with the knight, and now I really have to take. If I don't take, he's going to grab this pawn over here. If I defend it, he's still got the better pawn structure, and my pieces are kind of passive. So taking is the right move, and then I went rook c6 here. This was one other chance where I had to get a decent idea, but a decent position or better position. But it was an idea that was a little hard to spot at first. Let's see, if you want to see if you can find the idea, what's the best move for black? Okay, I'm going to give the answer away now. Let's see, I went rook. I mean, I should go rook to d6. And the idea is that if he takes, I take back with the king. And now I'm attacking this pawn with just one more move, and his king is too far away to get in there and defend. So it just turns it into a winning king and pawn endgame, and shows that that was one more advantage that black had, is that white's king was a bit out of play there. So I was doing well up until this point. Let's see, after rook d6, he should really just move the rook away, and then I can, activate. Let's see, I'm attacking his pawn. He can play like this, but and he can start attacking my pawns too. But anyway, I keep some edge, and that's probably the best way to play it. I went rook c6, and I think we're getting into the range where it's really just about even. Let's see, he goes rook to d5, attacking my pawns. Oh yeah, and my next move is kind of a mistake. I should really just go here. I don't know why I didn't think of this move. It's the simplest way to get the kind of position where I hold on to this pawn and I grab the c pawn, which is the idea I had. I wanted to get the c pawn. I guess there is a problem with this being the outside passed pawn. I have to worry about this being and a king and pawn endgame might be good for white here with the outside passed pawn there. Although this pawn may be close enough that even the king and pawn endgame is not entirely clear. But that's better. That would be better than what I played. Although the way I played it, I think, is still okay. Let's see. I went a4, just saving the a pawn, giving up this pawn. I thought at first I was going to get the c pawn back, but he just dropped his rook back and defended it. So his rook is a bit passive, but I haven't managed to win that pawn just yet. So I start going after it with my king, and then he trades, basically drops the rook back here and goes after my pawns. And now, well, here we get into some interesting ideas from the chess engine. I don't know if I would have, even if I had spotted this idea, I don't know if I would have played it. But the chess engine says that black has a winning idea like this. King b4, just giving up these pawns over here. King a3, giving up both of the pawns and taking the a pawn. And it gives a +2 edge to black, which is maybe winning, maybe not. It's hard to say. At some point, white is going to have to sacrifice that rook to stop this pawn from becoming a queen. But it'll take a few moves, and in the meantime, white can get these pawns rolling, and maybe I'll have to sacrifice my rook to stop those pawns. So it's all a long way in the future and hard to calculate. So it's a tough way to play. Let's see. I went with in this position. I went with g6 to save one of these pawns. So I'd have one pawn holding back these two over here, and I still wanted to go after these pawns on the queen side here. So he took here, and I grabbed the c pawn, and then he went rook h4 check. So that's a nice move because it drives me back. If I come forward, he takes this pawn, and I can't go to this square. His pawn is guarding it, so I have to drop back. So that was a nice technique there, using the rook to drive my king back. And he played a3 here. And now I was a little bit worried about rook to b4 check, driving my king over to the side of the board. So I tried to activate this way, going after the e pawn immediately. The chess engine says rook c3 is better, and allow this. Well, he still could have played that anyway, but with this idea, rook b7. It's attacking this pawn. I'm attacking two of his pawns. I can take this one, and actually this one can't be defended very easily. So he takes, I take, and this appears to be about even. So after this, I think there's some slight edge to white here. Let's see. He goes king f2, starts to get his king into the game. I go c5. He goes king e2. I go rook c6, putting the rook behind the pawn. He goes king d2. And I push on with c4. And now the chess engine has switched, and it gives a winning edge to white. So so my inexact play in the endgame has turned a promising game against me. A bit unfortunate, but well, it gets hard in these long games. And in fact, in the next few moves, we both start making some mistakes. So I won't dwell on them too much. I'll just try and point out some of the interesting parts. Let's see, but instead of c4, the chess engine gives this kind of line. Rook to d6 check, I guess forcing the king to choose a side, and g5, forcing the knight to move, and rook to f6. So the idea is that after that rook takes, bring this rook in, king comes forward, and then rook a2, and this pawn is lost, and I'll have a passed pawn over here for counterplay, and that appears to be okay for black. Maybe not winning, but at least even. And after c4, apparently with correct play, white should be able to win this game. Let's see, he goes king c3, I go rook e6, looking at this pawn. He goes rook h3, defending it. I start pushing the g-pawn forward. Goes rook g3. Apparently rook f3 is a little better. After this move g4, he can drive my king back. That's one way that he gets an edge. Or if I don't play g4, if I play something like a rook e5 to hold on to the pawn, he can, first of all, play h3 to stop this pawn from going anywhere. And I'm kind of stuck here. I don't have a lot of moves. Let's say rook to d5. He can go e4, rook back to e5. Now his king can come in, and he can kind of drive me back like that. So that is how how white should get a winning advantage, starting with rook f3. Anyway, rook to g3 is a pretty natural move. But I had a reply here. I could have played g4 with the similar idea to what I had in the game. I'm going to take here and then take there, and that would be decent for me. Let's see. So he went rook g3, a slight mistake. I went rook e5. That was a mistake as well, since I could have played g4 there. Let's see. Now he goes rook f3, and apparently rook f3 is well, it's just not as good. This is a point, and I noticed this during the game, where he can bring his king in this way. And, you know, my king can't come forward, and he's hitting this rook. He's going to drive it off of this. I can't maintain my rook on the 4th rank anymore, or 5th rank. So that would be a good move. Let's see. He went rook f3, and I went rook e4. There, rook e4. So I got the idea at this point. It's kind of similar to what the chess engine was planning to do earlier. But at this point, it's kind of too late. He gets this rook e5 check in, drives my king back, and grabs a pawn. So now he has these two passed pawns. And now I can do what I plan to do. I can take here and give up that pawn and take here. So sometimes this passed pawn, especially if it's this far along, is a match for two passed pawns. I mean, it takes two pawns longer to travel the length of the board than it does one pawn, especially if they're under attack and have to protect each other all the time. But unfortunately for me, his king is too close. So this is a winning position for black at this point. I mean, for white. White has got to win here with good play, and he starts out with the right idea. I think he just moved too quickly at one point. Gotta take your time in these endgames. So let's see. I went rook a2. I'm just trying to keep his king from coming forward for a moment, but he starts pushing, and I realize I have to promote my pawn to get some counterplay or push it. He goes h5. I push. He goes king b3. I go king to c7. Need to get my king as close as possible to these pawns to have any kind of drawing chance. Of course, white is winning here, so there is no chance, but I am setting up one kind of sneaky last-ditch attempt to hold the game. Let's see. He went rook to g6. Rook to g6. Yeah. Leaving this h-pawn momentarily undefended. Just preparing to advance it. So I advance a2. And now he just needs to play something like g4 to defend that pawn. Or he could probably even push it. So that would be a win for white. But what he played was king b2. And that's probably something he'd been angling for since he started this. He saw a chance to neutralize this pawn, chase the rook away. But the rook comes over here, and the fact that this pawn is loose means that this is now a draw. He has to take, or I will queen, and I get to take his pawn. And and my king is closer to the action than his king. So my technique from this point on, at least, is correct. And it's a decent example of how to play. Basically, you want to get your king in front of the pawn and as far forward as possible. So he did a good job of trying to hold my king back, but then he retreated this way. Maybe he should have just retreated along the third rank. I can still probably set up a third rank defense of some kind. Keep my rook on the fourth rank and my king on the second rank. But this helps me when he drops his rook back, because now my king can come forward. Let's see, he comes back, and yeah, I offered this trade. You always have to be careful offering these trades, but after he takes and I take, my king is in front of the pawn, and he can't get his king in front of the pawn. He can go to, say, after this, takes, he can bring his king here, but I can stop it this way, and then however he goes, this is still going to be a draw because my king is in front of the pawn. Anyway, trying to remember this. Yeah, it's like this. Okay, and we'll get into that typical drawing pattern. So he gives the check, but all this doesn't matter really. It's all going to be a draw. And one of the ideas is to put your rook on the side and give as many checks as possible, and then offer to repeat until he chooses to do something else, and then move your king up as much as possible to stop that pawn at the earliest possible point. It limits the mobility of your opponent's pieces, and then finally he allows this trade. There was not going to be any shelter for the king against the checks. He would have had to get over here, and he couldn't get to that square without passing in front of his rook. So that allowed me to trade off the rook, and now this is that winning king and pawn endgame, which he played all the way out to this point. And then it was a draw by repetition at this point, I guess. Anyway, it was an interesting game. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon.